I don't want to sound too dramatic, but ultimately the government is the enemy of every citizen. And the idea that I assign seniorage to my enemy seems rather stupid, particularly if I take risks doing so.
Well, I think it's a smart thing to do because they want people to think they're your best friend.
This is why we emphasize the importance of owning physical assets. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Black Swan Capitalist YouTube channel. Today, we are honored to have Rick Rule with us today. Rick Rule is an astute analyst and a highly successful resource sector investor who has financed numerous exploration and mining companies over his 45-year career. Rick Rule, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. This is going to be a great conversation. All right. So as you know, there is a lot happening in the global economy, the geopolitical landscape, and even in the political system. But before we dive into all of that, there is a topic Mindell and I wanted to discuss with you today. It is a document that we discovered from the Federal Reserve website. This document discusses the potential need for a reset of the gold price to roughly around $20,000 an ounce. And we've done math and we've spoken to people in the past that says it could be significantly higher to that anyways. So Mindell and I have known for a long time that this tool was in their arsenal as a worst case scenario, which possibly could explain why the central banks are aggressively buying up all the gold. So generally, what are your thoughts on a gold reevaluation and this document? And we will send it to you when we're done with this call here.
I've seen the discussion of it, and I followed it with some interest. I need to disclaim my response by saying I'm not an expert on this subject matter. I haven't studied it extensively myself. I am less of the opinion that, based, by the way, on no research, that you would have a government revaluation of gold, and much more of the opinion that you would have a private revaluation of gold, which is to say that if you look back historically over time, governments and politicians have been enemies of gold. What gold does is it reduces the amount of power that a politician has over the medium of exchange. Nobody that I've ever seen has gone into government in a quest to limit their power. I've seen, too, that gold has done well during periods of time when private parties are concerned about the maintenance of their purchasing power in fiat-denominated savings instruments. I think, again, I'm better at the micro than the macro. My own reason for owning gold is the arithmetic around the U.S. dollar and separately U.S. Treasury securities, and the performance of gold over millennia during periods of time when other people harbored the same concerns as I do. To the extent that the government was forced by the market, as an example, to do this, much like FDR was in effect forced to control and reprice gold as a consequence of the New Deal, they would, of course, do it. I'm not a good enough political analyst to handicap that. I am, as a speculator, of the opinion that there is a probability that the gold price goes higher in free markets and a possibility that it goes dramatically higher.
Right. And go ahead.
I'm too old and too smart to give you an upside price target.
Of course. Right. It just makes sense that this is the direction we're going anyways. And I could see certainly gold going up because the purchase power is dying as well. There's a lot of factors, I think, that play into a higher gold price for sure on the geopolitical landscape. And,
what you say is very important. And I think particularly for people your age, when people ask me when the gold price is going to go up, I tell them 2000, 24 years ago. 24 years ago, the price of gold was $252 an ounce. Now it's something like 2,400.
Yeah.
So gold has done 8 and change compounded for 24 years. It's done precisely what people asked it to do. I think that's important to note. My fear is that the rate of gold price escalation increases. When I say fear, the set of circumstances that gives you $8,000 or $9,000 or $10,000 gold is not a pleasant set of circumstances. So the young
Indeed.
speculator should be very careful what they wish for.
Right.
Yeah, it means the cost of living will be extremely high. Debt issuance will be through the roof. More borrowing, more spending, printing money out of thin air, basically. And as a result, people that own those assets, or particularly gold, will be pretty happy.
And people who don't will be pretty angry. The social
Exactly.
circumstance around $9,000 or $10,000 gold, would be unpleasant.
Of course.
Well, you do think, Rick, that there is a probability of it happening based on the fact that central banks have been net buyers of gold since 2010, exceeding records on an annual basis till today. And personally, in my opinion, I don't think that's going to stop, because the OCB, the Congressional Budget Office, not too long ago announced that they're going to issue a minimum of $20 trillion in debt between the year 2024, which is this year, to 2034.
Yeah.
You've said so many things there that we need to unpack.
Let's do it.
Let me tax my 71-year-old memory to see whether I can remember them all. In the first instance, I don't think that central bank buying so far has reflected the economic fears that I have. I think that the central bank buying has occurred as a consequence of the weaponization of the US dollar.
Yeah.
In other words, the US government has attempted to use the status of the dollar as the world's reserve currency to extraterritorially impose its will on other countries. I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with the way that those other countries are run. I think it's none of my business. And I understand that they feel the need to defend themselves against the US government. As little as they trust us, they trust each other less, which means in terms of their dealing with each other, they would rather settle ultimately in gold than in their own respective currencies, which are often illiquid and non-convertible. Mm-hmm. I think the Chinese have looked at a couple things. First of all, I think that the Chinese, because I used to sell to CITIC,
that makes sense.
Parastatal. I think that the Chinese have come to understand that the fundamental arithmetic around U.S. Treasury securities isn't good either. I think they believe, they haven't told me this, but I think that they believe that the decline in the purchasing power of the U.S. dollar relative to the goods and services that they would like to buy, relative to the interest rate that they get holding U.S. 10-year treasuries, is a lousy arithmetic deal. And if more people, including more living, breathing human beings, come to that point of view, then I think that the increase in the gold price that you've seen and the depth of the market buying will be very different, which is to say that the buying that you've seen, I don't think has occurred for the reasons that I think will propel it. It's important to note for your listeners that if you look at data around inflows and outflows of physical gold ETFs, that the North American and European public have not been buyers of gold until 11 weeks ago. The increase in price that we've seen over the last 2 years has occurred without retail participation in the West.
Mm-hmm. Good
I
note.
think it's important to note that.
If I can touch on something though, if you just look at like the macro ecosystem of not just the central banks, but governments around the world and what the BRICS nations are doing, I just feel like there's the need to, well, they're buying gold, I think, because of some sort of monetary reset. Wouldn't you agree with that? Or is this just because of the devaluation of the purchasing power? There's got to be something more to it.
I don't know. I'm a lender by nature. Right. I'm a credit analyst, not a political analyst. But I think the readjustments that could take place in the market would be equally dramatic. Let's look at some arithmetic just for fun. Around the US dollar and around gold. The first is the on-balance sheet liabilities of the US government relative to their ability to service them. Right now, we owe almost $35 trillion. Admittedly, $29 trillion net of the Fed's own balance sheet. Don't want to do a double count. So let's call it 30 just for fun. But that isn't the scary part. It's the reported part. The scary part, if your listeners look at me, they can see, which is to say the net present value, unfunded net present value of entitlements. We have made promises in the United States to old folks like me for Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, stuff like that, federal pensions, military pensions. The net present value, not the nominal value, the net present value of the unfunded liabilities, according to the Congressional Budget Office, exceeds $100 trillion.
Yeah, it's insane.
So federal liabilities are $120 trillion, and the increase in the on-balance sheet liabilities is $2 trillion a year. And the estimate of the accretion of the unfunded value of entitlements is $4.5 trillion a year. So we're 120 trillion upside down. And rather than digging us out of the hole, we increase it fully loaded by $6.5 trillion a year. This is profoundly tough arithmetic. When folks ask me when I'm going to sell my gold, I say, when I understand the nature of that, the answer to that conundrum, when I understand how we service $120 trillion in obligations with a budget that's in deficit, fully loaded, $6 trillion a year. The other statistic that people often don't look at is the fact that precious metals and precious metals related assets are stupidly underowned historically. The United States is an extreme example because we have such a strong economy and such a strong technology market. But in the United States, the market share of precious metals and precious metals related assets relative to all savings and investment asset classes is less than 0.5%, which is to say only 0.5% of total savings and investment assets in the United States is stored in precious metals or precious metals related securities. The 4-decade mean market share is 2%.
So it's significantly undervalued.
Well, underowned.
Underowned.
Goes differently to value.
Both.
If you were merely to revert to mean, you would increase demand for the stuff fourfold. And that's what I think is going to happen.
That's the direction I see it going in. Yeah, it could take some time, but
there's a lot of people who are real dramatic, and they say that the U.S. dollar is going to, go the way of the dodo, and the U.S. Treasury market's going to disappear, and all this kind of stuff. You don't need to believe that to own gold. You need to believe in mean reversion, and you need to believe in arithmetic. Those are the only things you need to understand.
Well, for me, it's just really a store of value.
Correct.
Compared to what we see happening in the world.
An insurance policy.
Insurance
policy. That's correct.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
It's funny,
Listen,
Rick.
I honestly hope that when I am about to shed my mortal coil, when I become reflective and look back over time, I really hope that I regard all the gold I bought as a mistake. I don't want to see a circumstance.
Why?
Well, I don't want to see a circumstance where I enjoy if you look at it as an insurance class, which is what you just described.
Yes.
Look at how you get paid in insurance, life insurance. I mean, somebody croaked, right? Car insurance means you had a wreck or somebody stole your car.
Yeah.
House insurance means you had a fire, somebody broke in. There's no set of circumstances where you get paid on an insurance policy other than annuity that's pleasant. That notwithstanding, if you're insuring against something, you want the premium to be just, want it to be affordable relative to the payoff. And that's where I am with gold.
It's very justifiable. And actually, we share the same sentiment. However, though, we have from a probability standpoint, statistically speaking, we think it's going to go in that direction based on the geopolitical issues, currency debasement, and that's how we feel. Yeah.
I agree.
But we share the same sentiment as you.
The set of circumstances that happened in the decade 2000 to 2010 was not particularly dramatic. and the
Mm.
gold price went from 250 to $1,900. You get a sevenfold increase in the price without a reset, without global catastrophe. There are a lot of people who are put off by the alarmist rhetoric around gold,
Mhm.
who shouldn't be put off. I'm not discounting the alarmist outcome. That's why I own insurance. What
Mhm.
I'm trying to tell people is that their tolerance for gold ought to be much more inclusive
Right.
than simply a political reset.
Can we touch on something else? This is
Sure.
something I really wanted to ask you. Now, Mendel and I, we watch a lot of your videos over the years, and I know you don't talk a lot about digital assets, what some people commonly call crypto. But Mendel and I, we don't talk about crypto. We don't focus on crypto itself, but we focus on the underlying technology behind it, which is called
Yep.
the distributed ledger technology.
Yep.
Now, there is one specific technology Vendel and I focus on and emphasize. It's called Ripple Net, which uses a digital asset called XRP.
Right.
And on our research, it appears that many central banks around the world, including those of the BRICS nations, have been partnering with this payment company to use the technology for their payment systems. And after this call, also, we have documents from the World Bank, the IMF, and the Bank of International Settlements specifically mentioning this digital asset and another as far as a stable coin. Now, Vendel and I believe that this ties into the narrative of tokenization, and that's where this is all going, digital economy and so forth. And gold being tokenized for central banks as well, things that has been discussed by the World Gold Council. Just a macro view on this. What are your thoughts on Ripple and the digital asset XRP if you've done research on them? I want to hear your take on this.
I want to begin by disclaiming expertise. I'm fascinated with the application of blockchain technology in the financialization of all markets. I can confirm firsthand that the World Gold Council and the Royal Canadian Mint are similarly fascinated.
Yeah.
I don't own digital currencies because I only own things that I understand. I have invested in 4 different applications of blockchain and distributed ledger technology around financial services, and in particular gold. While I don't understand Bitcoin, I do understand gold. And the idea that you could have a digital token that represented physical gold could be exchanged for physical gold, but could enjoy lower denomination, more liquidity, and less transaction cost is, I think, a reality in the not very distant future. I
Yes.
think it'll revolutionize all financial markets, whether or not XRP is the technology that is going to be adopted. I similarly have noted in the quarterly from the Bank for International Settlements, to which I subscribe, their own interest in XRP. And it was interesting for me to hear it from younger, smarter people than I, like you. And I wouldn't want to comment on the technology because that's not what I do. I'm a lender.
Yeah.
What I really am is a credit analyst. But the idea that we will soon have a gold token, well, hopefully we'll have 4 or 5 so that they can compete with each other. I think I think it's both inevitable and I think it's imminent.
Yes.
If you describe imminent in 2-year or 3-year terms. The World Gold Council is working very, very, very hard at this, which is to say it already has the backing of the industry.
Right.
I think they already have some alternatives in their, they already have some choices, I think.
Yeah, the choices that exist in terms of technology are okay. The choices that exist right now in the market legally are problematic for me. They are issuers that don't have published and audited balance sheets,
Yep.
which is to say that what they really are is the unsecured credit of the sponsor, that the gold isn't on deposit, or if it is, it isn't verifiable, that the exchange and tokenization method doesn't necessarily rely on the rule of law. I think you need a very, very, very different product. At
Right.
Sprott, we were able to introduce a product years ago, nowhere near as efficient as a token could be, by the way, our physical trust. And what made the physical trust work is it traded on the New York Stock Exchange. It didn't accept delivery receipts. In other words, every share was backed by physical gold or physical silver. That stuff was in the Royal Canadian Mint. It was audited, and if you owned enough of these certificates, you could redeem them for physical metal. A token will have to exhibit all of these characteristics.
Of course.
It would be the same concept, but
It
a
cannot be
tokenized
It cannot be
version.
fractional reserve. It has to be stored with a trusted intermediary. It has to be redeemable in specie. All of those things have to be accomplished, and all of those things are going to be accomplished.
The fact that they're putting all these partnerships into place while leaving breadcrumbs around, we just feel that there's, based on the research, we've been researching this for 4 years now,
Right.
and these documents confirm to a degree that there is going to be a link between, again, the digital asset XRP and functioning as a global reserve settlement mechanism for cross-border payments.
For liquidity.
And that liquidity as well. And that needs to have some backing. And the IMF, Kristalina Georgieva, said this: if we're going to have digital money, we have to have it backed by real assets or a basket of commodities, something Simon Hunt has confirmed with us on our show as well. So we just believe there's a connection there that's in plain sight. It's just a lot of people are not putting the pieces together.
Yep. And whether it occurs or not, I think it occurs privately.
Privately.
I personally would rather deal with you in gold,
of course,
than US dollars. I don't want to sound too dramatic, but ultimately the government is the enemy of every citizen. And the idea that I assign seniorage to my enemy seems rather stupid, particularly if I take risks doing so.
Well, I think it's a smart thing to do because they want people to think they're your best friend.
Right.
Yeah. But this is why we emphasize the importance of owning physical assets.
Sorry, Rick. So in 1933, they, issued they confiscated gold. They had the executive order. And then interestingly, I think they offered citizens about $20 and some change.
That's correct.
And then 1 year later, approximately a year later, they revalued it on a public level to what, $34 and some change?
Yeah, that was cute.
Yes. And the thing is, it has happened in the past for
Sure.
various reasons. They could argue restructuring the debt, etc., whatever. But that's why we keep getting at there's a probability that because the debt, as you said, on balance 35 trillion, almost 35 trillion, off balance sheet because of Medicare, etc., approximately exceeding $100 trillion now, that they might have a justifiable reason to reevaluate the price. Now we found this document. It was maybe you heard about it, but it was recent. We found it, we read through it, and it was from the I have it right here. It was from the, excuse me, the let's see. Okay, yes. So the financial accounting manual for the Federal Reserve banks that suggested basically the Treasury Secretary can instruct the Fed to revalue the gold price on the U.S. government's balance sheet.
Yeah, I don't think there can be any doubt of that. Any skepticism that I would have would be the political establishment's willingness to tie their ability to do fiscal policy to the discipline of gold. Let's understand that these people exist to redistribute, to steal. And anything that constrains their power seems inconsistent with the goals of any politician that I have ever met and interacted with maybe the sole exception of Ron Paul.
He's an exception, definitely. And I love how blunt you are. Continue.
So, well, just the idea that they would willingly entertain a system absent a complete and total breakdown of every other system which would move the gold price anyway. The
Right.
idea that they would be willing to constrain themselves to the discipline of gold is very difficult for me to understand. I ascribe all kinds of underhand motivations to them. I don't understand why or how they would willingly circumscribe their power. My belief, there's a wonderful, I forget whose quote it was, maybe Mencken, who said that you understand politics by looking at the root of the word. Poly, of course, from the Greek for many, and tick from the English colloquial for small blood-sucking insect. And if you think of it there, the job of the politician is to deliver benefits to his constituency stolen from other constituencies.
Mhm.
And the easiest constituency to steal from is the unborn. And gold constrains the politician's ability to steal for their constituency, to
Yeah.
steal from other constituencies, and to impoverish the unborn. And
Yeah.
it's difficult for me to understand why or how they would put in place the architecture for a system that constrained them to do what they consider their birthright.
When you put
Good
gold
point.
at the top over there, it kind of takes away their power to inflate and to issue debt. And therefore, they can't really control and enslave you to
Yep.
some degree. You have a
Right.
very
Well-
good point there. I think this is where the central bank digital currency might come in. It's
Mhm.
very possible that they,
That's a
again,
very different that's a very different topic.
right.
But we
But,
think they're
I
tied
very,
think,
very different topic.
I think the timing of how all of this is converging is bringing us to a moment, a Bretton Woods moment, if you will, a new kind of Bretton Woods. And if this
Oh,
document I'll send you, yeah,
But much worse,
much worse, right?
Imagine a currency that they controlled that they could cancel based on your social credit score.
Yes.
Yeah.
If they didn't like what you posted on X,
We would be canceled, Rick.
a
And so would you.
cancelable currency is, that's an amazing concept.
Mhm. Well, this goes back to that document I'm going to send you. It talks about a two-tier system, and it's always been two-tier, but
Right.
one system that's closed, central bank digital currency, citizen behavioral disciplinary currency, and the other one backed by hard assets.
Right.
It's very strange.
Right.
It
Well, I
gave
think
me
I'll do the same
goosebumps.
thing. I'll operate in parallel.
Yeah.
I'll have the currency that I deal with them in, which is cancelable, and then I'll have my own currency.
Right.
That old-fashioned one where my asset isn't simultaneously somebody else's liability.
Yeah. I'd rather have gold and silver. It's awesome. Would you like to add on to that, or can I move on to the next topic? Because I wanted to also discuss the BRICS nations.
Yeah. Go. I did want to ask Rick something, but go ahead if you want to start with that.
Okay, well, we'll talk about the BRICS real quick. So I just want to know what
Okay.
your thoughts are on the BRICS nations. They are expanding. They just got Thailand and many other nations. And do you see them posing a real threat to the dominance of the dollar?
No, I don't. Doug Casey used to say the US dollar is the worst currency in the world with the sole exception of all the others. I remember myself selling to the Chinese around 2010, 2011, 2012, and to other Asian nations, but having fairly frank conversations about the US dollar, asking them whether they trust us, as the Apple did. No, but we trust you way more than we trust each other, meaning other emerging economies.
Of course.
I remember describing to the manager of an Asian sovereign wealth fund the fact that while I was flattered that they were investing in U.S. Treasury securities, thinking relative to the credit quality, whether they thought the U.S. government was honest. And they said, well, ultimately, of course, it's a lie. This is a quote. But yours is a deep and liquid lie, unlike the other lies that we're told. Think about what backs a BRIC currency. Who owes you seigniorage or sovereignty? Think about the fact that all the currencies which would be constituent, or all of the domestic political and monetary systems which would be consistent, which would be constituents, they're mostly themselves opaque and non-convertible.
Right.
Think about the fact that until 25 or 30 years ago, the Russians and the Chinese were engaged in a shooting war across the Amur River. What the BRICS system will ultimately be, if it becomes anything, is a trade settlements mechanism. If the BRICS countries really believed that there was going to be a currency, they wouldn't be buying gold because they wouldn't need a medium of exchange. They could conjure one up. Imagine yourself as Xi, and imagine a circumstance where you thought over the course of a year, you would have $150 billion trade surplus with the Russians. What do you want from Russia? A little bit of fertilizer, some natural gas, maybe some vodka. How much vodka are the Chinese going to drink? So now imagine that you end up with a bunch of IOUs from the Russians. How do you turn it into something that you want? Do you counterclaim against the South Africans? How about the Brazilians? Maybe Bolivia pays you off. You get where I'm going?
Yeah,
I do.
yeah. Good point.
The primary medium of exchange, I think, for the balance of my lifetime, will be the US dollar. I think that there will be some disintermediation out of the US dollar in terms of bilateral settlements, but that those bilateral settlements will have really 90-day settlements. And I bet you that the de facto settlement mechanism will be US dollars.
Still,
Yeah,
it's very
Well,
interesting because a lot of trade is done in dollars still. So it would take a very long
absolutely.
time for all of this to come into fruition. So
And,
what
you
is
know,
the what
a
is
lot of
the
the
narrative
sovereign,
then?
a lot of the sovereign holdings of bonds that isn't in US treasuries is in euro dollars.
So why are they putting out all these narratives out there saying that the BRICS is expanding? I mean, it's like almost putting people in a state of fear. And do you think
Well,
it's
I
driven?
think for one thing, it plays extremely well politically. Pick a country in the world and complain about bullying at the hands of the US, and you are popular.
Right. I see. Okay. Yeah. So this is
Uh,
probably why we're going to war now, right?
well, that's the other thing. I mean, we're forcing them. Whether or not you agree with what the Russians are doing in Ukraine, the fact is that we stole $300 billion worth of US Treasury securities owned by the Russians.
Mhm.
Suppose that you're another country and you think that your policies may get you in difficulty with the US dollar. You think there was a lesson there? Think about the fact that the US dollar enforced sanctions between two third parties, no Americans, through the SWIFT banking system. In other words, we constrain the Belgians in terms of doing business with Iran or North Korea or somebody else that they might want to do business with. The enemy of the US dollar is not in Brussels or in Moscow or in Shanghai. The enemy of the US dollar is in Washington.
Right.
We're
Good point.
responsible for the origination of the BRIC system.
So we're pointing the finger at them.
Yeah, we gave them no
Interesting.
choice. I
It's
mean,
funny. The real enemy is the central bank, then the Federal Reserve.
as
Well-
that great political philosopher Pogo once said, I have met the enemy and he is us. I don't know if you're old enough to remember those Pogo cartoons, but I always thought that was a classic phrase.
Yeah, well, it's true. They want you to think your enemy is 10,000 miles across the ocean, but they're right in your backyard.
Washington, D.C.
Yep.
That's right.
Well, Rick, I had a question for you. I'm just curious, and I know we have just a little bit of time left. I know you're really paying attention. You follow very closely the Bank for International Settlements and the World Gold Council. So you mentioned digital currencies, how they're really focused on this area and digitization, tokenization, since that's the direction the world is moving in. I'm just curious, but are there any specific currencies or digital currencies that you've come across for facilitating transactions, cross-border payments, or focused on providing liquidity, anything of that nature, like
No,
XRP, XLM?
I'm not smart enough to have done that. I have invested in a few technologies around the digitization of financial markets and commodities. Back at Sprott, we did the same thing. Sprott maintains those investments.
Mhm.
We're watching very carefully the work that the World Gold Council is doing with industry, including Agnico Eagle.
Okay.
A very good former partner of mine, Peter Grosskopf, is on the board of directors of the World Gold Council and also on the board of directors of Agnico Eagle. He's sort of my de facto consultant
Wow.
as to where this is going technologically. I must admit, at age 71, I prefer to rely on a 54-year-old.
It keeps things easier, I guess. I know what you
Yep.
mean.
Yep.
Go ahead, Versan. Anything you wanted to add?
My God, it's just,
I-
you know, it's such an honor to talk to you because you really give perspective. Despite everything we've discussed here, I feel like there's still a new system that they're trying to bring in. And I think what we see happening with the dollar, sure, they're going to continue to inflate. And I think they're doing this also not just to devalue the currency, the purchasing power, take that away from you, but create a situation where they want to create the dependency on government. And this would explain why they've tried to weaponize the financial system, which they have done now, accelerating technology, big tech, the food industry, pharmaceuticals, all the things we're talking about now, energy even. So I just feel like they're trying to bring in this new system. And I don't know if it's because central banks are trapped or they can continue to inflate until oblivion, which is something they're going to have to do. Point finger at somebody else to go to war for some reason. Something bigger is going on. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around it. And Vindel and I, we poke holes in our own logic to figure this out. Just everyone's got a
Probably
different
there's some
opinion.
conjunction. There's some conjunction in part of my argument and yours, which is to say that increasing control by intergovernmental elites is always something they want. To the extent that they could leave less control over our purchasing and savings decisions to ourselves and accrue more of it to themselves, that would certainly be in their instinct, in their interest. I actually don't think they're smart enough to do it in a conspiratorial sense. I know that the hard money movement has been a hotbed of conspiracy theory for my whole time in it. There's been a discussion that there's been a decades-long conspiracy, as an example, to depress the price of silver. They didn't need to do that. The price was going to go down all by itself. You know,
Well,
you did. I mean, yes, is it manipulated overnight as an example at trading desks? Of course, all currencies are. But these great big conspiracies, in my experience, have required too much intelligence and too much planning and too much discipline to occur. My friend Doug Casey, again, describes a lot of these government people as people of medium capabilities from good families who, were it not for jobs in government, would wear a mask and a gun to a 7-Eleven. In other words, not necessarily the kind of people who could maintain a thoroughgoing conspiracy. To the extent that circumstances, A, allowed it, and B, warranted, that would be a different circumstance. I also don't think that the government needs to work very hard to foster increasing reliance on government by individuals, because that's what individuals want. I don't happen to think it's a good thing for them, but I think people vote because they want to impose their wills and their value on other people. They don't want to be reliant on themselves for their success or failure. They certainly don't want to be blamed for their success or failure. They want to be able to blame other people. And so in that sense, I don't think the government needs to work too hard to foster reliance on the government, because I think it's that very reliance on the government that assigns our actual enemy seigniorage, unfortunately. I think that's the greatest problem in the world. Really, truly the greatest problem in the world is that people don't understand the concept of voluntary exchange and the concept that one acquires material wealth by generating more utility than one consumes. It isn't about assignment, it's about creation.
Very good point.
Well, I think that's sad. I think it's true.
Very good point. Thank you so much for clarifying that. It makes more sense when you look at it that way. Absolutely. Those were my final thoughts. Mandela, do you have anything you want to discuss real quick?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's really interesting that, well, Versan and I, we discuss this a lot. We have these conversations off the camera, and we pay attention to really what they're doing, not just what they're saying, you know. And we've come to find that really truth is stranger than fiction in the world we're living in. And I'm not conspiratorial by any means.
Right.
And the funny thing is, I know how you said, Rick, people want to rely on the government. Yes, the masses, most people do.
Right.
That gives them some sort of peace of mind, comfort, and security. But for them to get even more people to rely on the government, I think they have to really lock you up in a system where they control you have not financial sovereignty anymore.
Right.
So our theory was they know that when they issue debt, it devalues the currency. It's not rocket science. You don't need a PhD to figure that out. However, though, a lot of the people they have are very skilled at screwing things up, and they have PhDs. So the funny thing is they're completely debasing the currency by issuing debt, borrowing, spending more, which will lead us to a point where it seems to us we're getting to the end of the currency's life cycle. And you know how market cycles work. We have different stages of them, and it seems we're coming to the end point here. And this is where the central bank digital currencies come in, where they're going to have a solution to the problem that they orchestrated in the first place.
Yep.
I understand.
It's called the Cloward Piven strategy. And I think that's what we've been seeing happening in the world, especially in America, is the Cloward Piven strategy, putting pressure on the system to break it down. But to what end? Who knows? What do you think?
I can only say you assign them too much credit.
Yeah.
I think they're victims of their own circumstance, and I think they're victims of their own larceny. I don't think this is occurring as part of any thoroughgoing conspiracy. I think it's a consequence of a collective incompetence to take responsibility
Of course.
for our own future. As again, as Pogo said, I have met the enemy and he is us. You know, we elect these people to steal from other people on behalf of ourselves.
That's like what George Carlin said, garbage in, garbage out.
I'm not discounting what you say, by the way. I'm just suggesting that the individual course of action that one would take to defend oneself from it is the same course of action that one would take if you looked arithmetically at the challenge in front of us. Look at people your age, okay? Without any view of conspiracy, you need to deal with the fact that my generation voted itself $100 trillion worth of benefits and forgot to pay for it. Okay? I mean, that's
Good
over,
point.
right? So you need to decide amongst yourself whether you do what might be considered to be the right thing, which is to say, you guys voted yourselves these benefits, you pay for them, we're not gonna. Tough thing to do politically. Or you understand that you're going to pay in and not get any benefits from it at all. Really, really, really interesting challenge. And as the friction from that challenge increases, what you really need to decide is how you're going to protect yourself. That's what you need to decide. Whether what you say in terms of a reset takes place in dramatic fashion, or whether simply the friction generated by competing voting blocks, young and old, white and black, rich and poor, whatever it is, BRICS,
Right.
generates so much risk that the volatility that's a consequence of that friction destabilizes your life. The answers, the probabilistic answers, there's no absolute answer. The probabilistic answer in either of those scenarios is roughly similar. You need to become individually anti-fragile, irrespective of how you think it plays. I'm not discounting what you say. I'm suggesting to you that if the investing vanguard and the voting vanguard around the world thinks that your response is alarmist, if they're incrementalists rather than alarmists, the strategy is the same.
Yeah.
It's unchanged.
Good point. Yeah, you make a very good point. Well, Rick, did you have any final thoughts that you want to share with the audience, with us?
Two things.
Please
First
take
of all,
your time.
thank you. Thank you. It's been fun. Secondly, we didn't discuss much about micro, which is really what I do. If your audience has natural resource stocks and they like the way I think, I would invite them to go to my website, ruleinvestmentmedia.com. Once there, if you list your natural resource stocks, I will, for free and with no obligation, rank them 1 to 10, 1 being best, 10 being worst. I'll comment on individual issues if I think my comments have some value. Please, 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 no tech stocks, no pot stocks, no crypto, just natural resource stocks. Finally, every year for 28 years, I've put on an investment conference. This year happens July 7th through 11th in Boca Raton, Florida. You could attend physically in Boca Raton, which I would love, or if that's inconvenient, you can join thousands of other people and view it from the comfort and convenience of your own home via live stream. In every case, if you think for any reason that I didn't deliver the value commensurate with the tuition I charged you, email me. I'll give 100% of your money back. No investment conference I know of in the world that has an unconditional money back guarantee, but mine does. Rule Natural Resources Investment Symposium, Boca Raton, Florida, or via the comfort and convenience of your own home, July 7 through 11. That's my commercial.
I love it.
Wonderful.
I think it would be a blessing for anybody to have the opportunity to attend one of those functions. You're truly a wealth of knowledge, Rick, really. And I know we didn't touch on the micro too much, but we're really hoping, Versan and I could have you back on in the very near future for round 2 and really get into the micro.
Something that might be fun is, as you can see by my shirt, I'm starting a new bank, my 7th.
Yeah.
And if you ever wanted to have a discussion about banking, I'm a lender by background. I'm actually a green eye shade guy. So I'd love to have a discussion about banking in my bank, or about natural resource investing, whatever you'd like to do.
A little bit of both.
Great.
Yeah, I would love that. I'm actually a former banker at Bank of America and IBC, a Canadian American bank, International Bank of Commerce. So we'll have a lot to talk about.
We could have fun. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rick.
Thank you.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And Vendel and I, we're big fans of your work. So we'll certainly stay in touch with you. And I'll send you those documents here shortly.
I look forward to it.
Thank you very much, Rick. Have a blessed day.
Thank you.